That'd be nice.
Yes.
Pity it's in Canberra.
Yes.
You know.
What to do a history of Canberra?
No, just a urban. I think you could just put up a proposal. I'm looking at urban history, some sort of. You could put up something associated with the Institute for Urban and I can't remember what it's called. Urban. Don't know, urban and planning. Anyway, some department there, but obviously they have research fellows. Yeah, have money. Yeah.
Well, as I say, we're still waiting for someone to write a biography.
Quite a while, so it might as well be comfortable. I mean, it varies on how long it takes, depending on how people answer it. I was looking at this.
Have you read it?
No, I saw it in the bookshop. Is it any good?
Yes, it's nice. I'm taking a while to get into it. It's quite very different.
Okay, well, how are you happy with the look?
Before he starts, it's like, oh, that woman.
Probably does. Okay, Joss, are you ready? Okay. Interview with Geraldine Ohlsson at Elizabeth Bay, 26th of March, 26th of May, 1995. Geraldine, where were you born?
In Sydney, at Crown Street Women's Hospital.
And what year was that?
1939.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Potts Point. My parents had a flat in St Neots Avenue, and they came out here from Ireland in about 1937, or from England actually. They're Irish, but they lived in England for a while. And they first moved to Darlinghurst Road. They had a small shop, a lingerie shop opposite the fire station. And I was a baby there. And then they moved down to St Neots Avenue.
What brought them out from England?
Well, they got married in England and they came out here for their honeymoon and decided to stay.
Gosh, and what were their ties with Ireland? Were their family there?
Oh yes, they have family there, and they still have family there. My father's dead now, but my mother's only just moved from her flat in Potts Point, where we grew up. She's in a retirement centre at Edgecliff.
It's an incredibly long stay.
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of a place was, King's Cross and Potts Point for kids in the 1940s?
Quite. It was at home. There were a lot of children around, a lot more people with young children. And we had fun. We didn't have a big flat, but we used to have children to play with, and it was sort of safe to play in the back street and in our small backyards. And we used to play with some Italian children that lived in the street near us, whose father had the greengrocer's shop in Macleay Street. And I went to school at St Vincent's when I was 4. And stayed there till I left school to do the leaving and did the leaving certificate. So I made friends there, and quite a lot of the children that went to school there lived in the area.
Did you know Cliff Fogarty?
Yes.
Ah, we've interviewed Cliff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They had at St Vincent's they had the nuns, and it was primarily a girls' school, but they had boys who came from kindergarten to second grade. And he was there, Cliff Fogarty, and his older sisters.
Oh, gosh. Well, what kind of a kid were you?
I suppose I was fairly quiet, and we had a fairly conventional and rather a strict upbringing, although we were happy. But it was quite different to what it is now. We didn't have the freedom that children have now. But I was the eldest, and then there was my brother, and then there was a break in our family for some years, and my mother had 2 other children after about 10 years after us, another sister and a brother.
Were your family, were they renting?
Yes, we rented a flat. It was a fair rented flat, and we weren't well off, and my father went to New Guinea in the Second World War, and my mother was by herself with 2 young children for some time while he was away, and it was quite a small flat, and but we had a good time, and we used to have outings. Memorable outings were, we used to go to Watson's Bay Baths, and the King's Cross pictures, and used to go to the pictures at Rose Bay on Saturday afternoons, the Winter Garden, and my father used to take us on walks down to Lady Macquarie's Chair, to the Flat Rock where we used to play, and yeah, we had a good time.
When you know how you're saying you were renting, was that the norm at the time?
Yes, it was.
And what do you mean by fair rent?
They were set, I think it was the state government, but they set a rent at a certain level, and it wasn't allowed to be increased, and it was controlled by the government.
How old were you when your father went to the war?
For about 2 or 3. And we went to, my mother took us up to stay with friends at Boorowa, because it wasn't considered safe to live in Potts Point because of the Japanese submarine coming into Sydney Harbour.
Do you have any memory of that at all? You'd be very young.
I've got a slight memory of going up to Boorowa. We lived on a farm with some friends of my mother's, and it was quite a stark place, very dry.
Did your mother stay with you?
Yes.
Oh, well.
And I remember that the lady we were staying with suggested that they cut my hair off because my hair was so fine, so I was my head was shaved. I remember that very well. I also remember that my brother was a small baby in a bassinet up there, and one day there was a net. He was on the veranda of this farmhouse, and this hawk came down, and my mother came out and was sitting on the baby's bassinet trying to get the net off. And the farmer was there, fortunately, and went round the side of the building and got a gun and shot it. Yes.
Gee.
So it's...
You could have preceded Lindy Chamberlain then.
Yes.
In fame. Okay, I mean, this is sort of a funny question, but what sort of a family do you come from? I don't know how you would choose to answer that.
They were very well, traditional Irish Catholics. Their faith was very important to them. My mother was a very outgoing, or still is very outgoing, social sort of person, and she quickly made a lot of friends in Sydney, and we often had friends coming to see us and calling in, and it seemed to be quite a good time, you know. And my father was a much quieter person, but they complemented each other and went well together. I suppose they had a fairly strict upbringing, so they were very careful of us, and we were very protected. Yes.
Had they had experiences in running shop? Was it your mother that ran the lingerie shop?
Yes. I don't think they'd had a lot of experience, but my father's brother lived here before they came, and it was his idea that they should do this. I don't think it was very successful. I think the time was people didn't have much money, but my mother had exquisite taste in things, so I think that everything there must have been very nice. But I don't think they were very successful business people.
Well, people still today talk about this exquisite lingerie shop up there. Is this the one?
I don't think it was. My mother's shop was opposite the fire station up in, it was Victoria Street, Victoria Street. And there was another lingerie shop that she used to go to that I remember later, which was down in Darlinghurst Road in the King's Cross area. It was opposite where McDonald's is now. And that was very nice. I think that might be the one that you mean. It was people, my mother used to go there and buy her corsets and brassiers, and they had beautiful things there. And they also had a hairdresser's in the shop. And you wouldn't believe it, but the lady that worked in the hairdressers and cut our hair and did my mother's hair still does my mother's hair. But she lives at Castle Crag. Yes.
But at that time, that would have been in the 40s.
Yes.
And this area had quite a sort of cosmopolitan sort of reputation. So people would have come to this area to buy nice, expensive sort of luxury.
I think they would have, because they had some very nice dress shops, and in that same area, near the lingerie shop opposite where McDonald's is now, they had a French milliner that my mother used to get hats from, and they had some nice dress shops. There were also quite a lot of good food shops. There was, in the King's Cross area up in that section, there were quite interesting and beautiful sort of little restaurants, and many of them seemed to be run by European people who came out as refugees. I always remember the Balalaika Restaurant, which was where is it now? It's on the corner of Darlinghurst Road and Victoria Street at King's Cross, and the Crest Hotel is there now, or the hotel which was the Crest. I think it's got a different name now, and it was on the first floor. So there is now at the moment there's a bar with a big glass window on that corner, and just above that at this time was this beautiful Balalaika Restaurant, and they had a sort of an open veranda. It was really a lovely building, and there was this man in there playing music and the violin, and it was just beautiful. Yes.
Would that have been the late 40s, or when would you remember that from?
From when? It would have been the late 40s. I also have clear and very vivid memories of the American servicemen up at King's Cross, and you used to see them walking along that area in rows with Australian girls. They walked in pairs, one behind the other, and the women would have the most fantastic clothes on. They all wore those, a lot of them seemed to wear those long slacks with the flared bottoms, and the big platforms sold sort of sandals.
In the 40s?
Yes. They were quite fashionable.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
I remember that very much.
And were they prostitutes, or were they
I don't
girlfriends?
know. I wouldn't have known at that time. I suppose they were girlfriends, or yes, could have been both.
Because I've had a lot of comments about people saying because people dressed, or comments that people were very drab in their dress, and
really?
And that they remember seeing these wonderful, colourful women, and then they realised later on that they were the prostitutes, different brothels around the place.
Oh, right.
And just loving the clothes that these women were wearing, and then realising when they grew up, and that the rest of the population wasn't. Yeah.
Yes.
And you didn't occur to you?
No, well, I was too young, really, because so I didn't even know what that was. So they could well have been, because I wasn't 10 till then, 1949. So at that period, I wouldn't know. But it seemed to be with friends of my mother's that she had in, and people that lived near us. They always seemed very glamorous women to me. In the next door flat to us in our building, there was this lady, Kath Walker, lived. She was a brilliant pianist, and she was the mother of Kerry Walker, who's now the Australian jazz singer, who's quite. And Kath, her mother, used to play the piano up at King's Cross at this time at the California Club. That was a few doors down from. Oh no, it was exactly where McDonald's is now, and so it was very You know, it was a very exciting cosmopolitan place.
Yeah, sounds wonderful.
Not only that, but my mother could do all her shopping up there, all her food shopping, which we can't do now. We have to go out of the cross, you know, because it's so touristy.
Even
But-
groceries.
Yes, you could get, there were grocery shops and beautiful fish shops and butcher shops, and she had a lot of things delivered, and people used to come around with cart, you know, men would come, this barrow man had come round to the door with selling fruit and vegetables, and there were brilliant cake shops up at King's Cross. They tended to be rather Australian sort of cakes, but very good, you know, Nemish tarts and cherry cakes and rainbow cakes and cinnamon buns and things, but there were so many of them. Yeah. And also there were some very, very beautiful old houses in Macleay Street that I remember well but have gone now.
Did they have names, those houses?
Well, where the hotel, what was the Nico, and I think it's now called the Landmark Hotel, in there, it must have originally been an old home, but when I was a child it was the Cairo Hotel, and it was quite beautiful. It was rather sort of North African in the type of architecture, something like you'd seen the film called Casablanca, and it had beautiful palm trees out the front, and it was really gracious, and a great big garden in the front. I think a lot of American servicemen used to stay there in the war. That was quite lovely. That was pulled down when they built, what was that first hotel they built there? Oh, well, there was a hotel there before the Nico, the Chevron.
Oh, right.
It was pulled down. And then opposite where the Nico is now, there was the Jewish rabbi had a beautiful house. I think it's the Sheraton Hotel now.
Do you know what his name was?
I forget.
Yeah.
Mm.
And can you remember any of the residentials? Were there many residentials around at that time?
Down opposite Macleay Regis on the corner of McDonald Street and Macleay Street, the lower end of Macleay Street, there was a long, I think they were residentials, they were called the Chimes. They were sort of, not terrace houses, I suppose they'd be built around the 1900, and they were all let off and actually a family we knew whose children we used to play with, and I think they also went to St Vincent's, they owned them.
Right. Where did most people who lived in the area, did they mostly live in flats or?
Yes. They weren't.
And you know the residentials, were they still, were they respectable or even affluent? There were some in the 1920s that just sounded out of this world in terms of affluence and what have you. Were they still like that, or had they sort of come a bit down market? What sort of people would live in them in the 40s?
Probably it's right, as you say, that they had come down a bit. It was a bit more down market, and people weren't quite so affluent. But they were still seemed to me quite respectable.
And your memories would date, say, from 1945 on?
Yes.
Well, they should have had well, with the influx of the Americans, they should have had money by then to undertake repairs. I mean, were they well maintained?
Yes.
So imagine they might have got run down in the Depression.
Yes.
Yeah. So they didn't look shabby or anything?
Oh, no. No, probably. So I do remember that Chimes was a tiny little bit seedy looking, but it was, I mean, it may have been to my childhood memories where it was in a brown colour, you know, and it seemed a bit dull looking. So probably it was, you know, it was quite all right.
Well, most people in the area, where did they work?
Well, we knew people that had shops. Well, I had people that worked in offices in the city. My father worked on, he was for a long time, he used to open the Glebe Island and Piedmont Bridge. He worked for the Department of Main Roads, and he used to walk from Potts Point to there. He was a great walker, and he was a shift worker because that was the nature of the job, so it was quite hard for my mother in a small flat, and we all had to be very quiet in the daytime while he was sleeping, sometimes because he'd be working late at night. But it's a little bit hard. I had another friend who I went to school with. Her father was in the Navy, and they lived in Wildfell Gardens. They were quite affluent people. It's a little bit hard for me to remember where people worked.
What was the socio-economic mix? I mean, were people affluent or working class, or what would you say?
I'd say really working class up to not really affluent, but some quite well-off people. The Italian family that lived near us used to work extremely hard and let off rooms. They had quite a big flat across the road and let off rooms in their flat to other Italian immigrants that came in, so that they acquired quite a lot of money. And from their shop and doing that, so they moved to Rose Bay quite soon after the war.
Everybody always says that the Cross was really, and Potts Point was really sort of cosmopolitan, and a lot of, they talk about artist communities and what have you. Do you recall, I mean, you mentioned, was it Edith Walker? Is that the name?
Kerry Walker is a little bit younger than me. She used to play with my brother and sister. Her mother had a flat next door to my mother.
And she was
Kerry is a jazz musician now. Her mother was a great pianist. There were quite a lot of artists. On the corner of Grantham Street, at the back of our street, there was a beautiful old house, and Sally Herman lived there for quite a long time, and we used to know him, but the lady next door knew him very well. And then there were actors living in the flats on both sides of us that we knew well, and they were good friends.
Who were they?
Don Crosby, and who was a well-known Australian actor who died a few years ago, and his children are also still in the profession. And he was on one side, and on the other side there was, I think there were people who were involved with the ABC Children's Hour. They were lovely people on the other side. Yes. Yes, it was quite a bohemian place, and there were a lot of...
Are there any particular local characters?
Well, there was B. Miles, who I remember very well. When we get on the tram, she'd always start sprouting poetry and talk to my little brother, which embarrassed him immensely. And I remember her.
Were you afraid of her?
Well, we were a little bit afraid. She was so... my parents were rather conservative, and she was so forceful, and we thought, why would anyone speak in this loud voice to people they don't know on the bus? So we were a tiny bit afraid, but...
Was she ever belligerent?
No, I don't think you'd say belligerent now. I look back on it from now, but she seemed to me then.
And what was the general attitude of people to her?
I think a lot of the times they saw it as a bit of a nuisance. Yes.
And
that was, but
that's tolerant, isn't it? A nuisance.
Yes. Oh, she was tolerated. Yes, but people think, oh, not that again,
And was she? The other thing was she like a derelict, or was she? Well.
She had a very beautiful voice, and of course she was very articulate. She looked very shabby and used to wear big old overcoats, sort of buttoned up, and you know, very tightly. And yeah, she could say she looked very shabby.
Did you have any idea where she lived?
Well, I remember that she used to live in Rushcutters Bay, I think under the bridge for a while. She used to sort of camp out. But I don't know if I knew that at the time or that I heard it later.
And your memories of her would, what, go back to the late 40s or into the war period?
Probably, yes. Oh, and I remember her after that, of course.
Were there any other characters around? Any, like, eccentrics or... What about local colourful racing identities, for example? Crims? We're talking about eccentrics.
Well, I do remember a lady that lived at the bottom of Victoria Street, the very bottom of Victoria Street, in an old house, an old wooden house, which is actually still there, a cottage. And she had many cats, and it was overlooking Woolloomooloo. And she was always out and feeding them, and she often seemed to be out in a nightgown, in the day, you know, feeding the cats. And she seemed to be a European lady and a little bit, you know, she wasn't all there, and she was quite a character in the area. I think Sally Herman has a painting of her called The Catwoman or something like that.
And would she be in the street and wander around the streets in her nightgown?
Oh, well, she'd come out in the street because there were many cats out in the street near her house and just round the lane at the back. And yes, I remember her. I remember my mother mentioning Kate Lee and Tilly Devine.
What did she have to say about them?
I think it was mainly connected with the sly grog industry. And
was that considered to be a very bad thing? Did
No, it was a useful thing. My parents used to go and get some from time to time, you know, and a bit of an adventure, you know. And
what made it an adventure? I mean, could you actually be raided?
I think they my mother and father sometimes used to like go out dancing, and they used to go to the Roosevelt nightclub, which was in Orwell Street, and I think it was hard to get a drink there or something. That was all. I was quite young, so I don't remember it. My mother used to wear the most beautiful evening dresses, I remember. She probably bought them with her from when she lived in London. And so it was all part of, the sly grog thing was quite a glamorous, adventurous part of life, you know. And yes, I remember them mentioning Kate Lee and Tilly Devine in that. And it could have been in less salubrious connotations, but it would have gone over my head at the time. Another character I remember quite well because it occurred a bit later when I was at school, probably when I was in senior school, was Rosalind Norton, who I think she lived in Victoria Street. There was a lot going on about her, about witches and black magic, and the nuns were terribly protective, and we were all told we were never allowed to walk down Victoria Street. You were only allowed to walk up Macleay Street when people were going home. And
was that because she was there?
Oh yes, and there were Victoria Street was considered quite seedy.
Were there brothels there?
Probably there were, but I wouldn't have known myself because at the time I didn't know about brothels. There were a lot of there seemed to be a lot of sailors living down there, American sailors or something. Actually, I was a boarder at St Vincent's for some time, even though my parents lived quite close, because they thought it was easier for me to study. It was when I was later in a later period at school when I was doing the leaving certificate. And I remember that some of the boarders used to hang out the window into Victoria Street waving to the sailors. That was a bit of a scandal. So, I remember Reg Boom, who used to have, he had nightclub at Double Bay, and then he had Les Girls at King's Cross for a long time.
And how do you remember him?
Well, his daughter went to school at St Vincent's, and he was a very colourful character.
How did the nuns cope with him? And how was his daughter treated there with?
Quite the same as everyone else. She had a lot of money, and I think perhaps the nuns were fairly pragmatic. So yes.
Okay. What other people? You mentioned. Did you mention Abe Saffron before?
Yes, I remember that. I don't know if I can see the picture of him, but my mother always said that he used to drive through King's Cross in an open sports car with lots of, always seemed to have a glamorous woman beside him, and he was a very colourful, sort of glamorous sort of person at that time.
Mm. Were there people that you had to avoid? So, what can you remember of Rosaline Norton? Can you remember her at all?
I don't think I ever saw her, but I used to see. I mean, we all knew that she was there. There were always pictures of her in the paper, and I think I'm not sure, but I think the nuns at school had to put up a picture out of the papers to say this was this was the person that we should avoid, and we shouldn't go into Victoria Street, and we shouldn't be in that area.
So people took it quite seriously that she was a witch or was into black magic.
We got a lot of publicity. Yes.
Well, was there anybody else that you had to avoid?
Not that I can recall, really. No.
Can you remember any crims?
Not specifically. I think it was later in the. It was really in the early 60s that there were up at the Hasty Tasty. That was at the top of King's Cross at William Street, right at the top of William Street, where there's a hotel now with the supermarket underneath it, right at the top of William Street.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of the hotel, but it's you see it as you're coming up William Street. There was a sort of a barbecue place, and you went in and it had concrete floor. It was a pretty rough sort of place, but they used to have the vice squad always there. And
it was a rough sort of place, and
yes, and if you were going to get any crims, you'd get them there. But the police detectives used to go in there too.
With prostitution, were girls at that stage in the late 40s, were they working in the streets or were they mostly in brothels?
Well, I don't know about the late 40s because I was so young that I just had no idea about it, and prostitution, sex, I never knew about it till I left school, which was in 1958.
It couldn't have been too obvious if you could grow up in this area and be unaware.
No, whether it was that my parents didn't speak about it in front of us, but I didn't know about it. But I knew, I got married quite early and brought my own children up in this area, and which was, my own children were small in the early 60s, and I remember then at that time that the prostitutes were all located down in Chapel Lane in just off William Street, down in East Sydney there.
Oh, right.
So that was a very thriving, busy area then.
What about SP booking? Was there much of that around?
Yes, it seemed to be, very busy, and as the local shops would all have a service where they put bets on for people. The butcher, I remember, did.
What was the attitude to that by most people?
Oh, it was just an amenity that everybody needed to use.
Did you hear people talking about that the law was, stupid?
I think
Or was it accepted?
I think it seemed to be accepted to me. I didn't hear a lot at all. My parents, didn't put a lot of bets on, but now and again they did.
Mm. What did your parents? How did they feel about the Queen and the British? Did you?
Well, my mother was very anti-British because she grew up in Dublin when they had the black and tans, and it was a very frightening period for her, and so she was always very anti-British. My father not so much.
Were you aware of any concept in your family of something sort of like, I've heard people refer to like the penury laws, where there was laws that were kept, these are law-abiding people, and then there were laws that were British laws, or laws to keep working people down, and those laws were ignored. Politically, where did your parents stand?
They always voted Labour. They were. I suppose they were. Yes, they were working class people. I think because of my mother's background in life, she left. They left Ireland quite early because her mother remarried and went and lived in England, and I think she had to live in England, and it's quite difficult for Irish people that time living in England. They had to. Irish people tended to be looked down on, so they had to put on a sort of front. So my parents felt that they had to keep up a sort of front all the time, it was important. So I didn't hear a lot about, laws to be ignored or anything like that. But they voted Labour, they were Irish Catholics, and they would help people who were in trouble.
Yeah. Were they ever politically involved? Were they active?
No, they weren't politically involved.
Was your father involved in the union?
He would have probably been a member of the union, but he didn't, he wasn't that sort of person. His life revolved around his family. He was very, and a few close friends. He didn't even have many friends. He was a very charming, and he was very much loved man, and both my parents were very well known in the area as family people. My mother did a lot of charity work.
What was their name? I don't think we've got their name.
Kavanagh.
Oh, that's right.
The K.
Well, your parents were Catholic. And you went to Catholic schools. How religious were they?
Oh, it was very important to them. We used to say the rosary every night, and Mass, of course, every Sunday, and prayers before you went to bed.
Confessions once a month? Communion once a month?
Yeah, communion every Sunday. Yes. We went to St Neots Church at Elizabeth Bay. I still go there. And
can you remember any of the local priests?
yes, very well.
What were they like?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I remember my earliest memory is of Father Ferrari, who was there when I was a small child, and I remember all the ones after that. I was married there, and
were they
my children went to school at St Neots because we lived Tony and I lived in a flat close to St Neots when we were married.
If you had to describe the church there, did the priests have a... Well, most of the priests in Sydney don't come from a particular order. Like, there's Redemptorists and there's, all those ones that usually do missions or what have you. But I was trying to say whether they had see if they had a very fire and brimstone approach, or did they have a sort of a more that the God was a loving God, or do you know what I mean? What sort of a God was portrayed? Because I think it can be very much influenced by the local priest, just in terms of his particular even personality or view of
Yes,
things.
yeah.
What was it like there?
Well, for the most part, they seemed to me very positive, warm, good-hearted men, you know. My parents had a lot to do with them because my mother did a lot of work for the church, and they often came to our home. So they were really, very loving, and you know, there was not much fire and brimstone or anything like that.
Would the nuns ever come to your home?
I think now and again, not so often.
Because there was a point in time when nuns just never ever sort of virtually left the
No,
convent. That's a
no.
more recent phenomena.
Yes.
When you went to confession, did they ever know who you were just from your voice?
Probably they did. Yes.
Yes. Well, what sort of a man was your father? How would you describe him? Oh, wait a minute. I'm not on. I'll do that again. So, what sort of a man was your father? How would you describe him?
Well, he was just a quiet Irishman. He had a good sense of humour. He was always telling jokes. And he was much loved and very popular.
Was he a hard man? What kind of discipline was used?
No, he was not. No.
If you were sort of being naughty or anything, what would happen? Would your mother...
Mother would discipline us, yes.
What would she do?
Oh, we'd often get a hiding. Yes.
Would she just hit you with your hand, or would she use a belt or a spoon, or...
Probably with a hand.
And how would you describe your mother?
Very attractive, outgoing personality. She likes lots of social life, and
what sort of social life? What sort of things would they do?
friends coming round, and then she'd have a lot of friends, and liked to go visiting people. She was a great talker, you know, still is, and then she took up a lot of. She used to work for the nuns at my school, and she did a lot of charity work, and because she liked it very much. And she used to work at St Vincent's Hospital in the little shop. She's only just retired from that for about 40 years.
Gosh.
Yes.
Well, what aside from the hospital, what sort of charitable work would she do?
Mainly the church, of course. There was the hospital. She used to work for the Daughters of Charity, which were an order that had a little sort of kindergarten for poorer children down in Stanley Street, and the Daughters of Charity used to wear these enormous big starched hats, and they used to have a chocolate wheel every Friday night at the corner of Darlinghurst Road and Victoria Street at King's Cross. So Mum would work on the chocolate wheel. That used to bring in such a lot of money. It was great fun. So she did lots of work. She worked for the hospice at Darlinghurst.
Who controlled the finances in your family?
My mother.
Yeah. What would happen to your father's pay packet?
Oh, she would organise it.
Right. So he'd be...
It didn't go very far. I don't know how they paid our school fees, but they did.
Were you expected to contribute to the family in any way as a kid?
Yes.
What did you have to do?
Oh, help with the housework and look after my younger brothers and sisters, and I made my own clothes. I used to make clothes for my little sister.
Oh my gosh. Well, what did the family do for fun?
Fun? Well, as I said, we often used to go to Watson's Bay. We didn't never have a car, but we went on the bus, or they had the tram then. And we periodically we would have friends who had a car, and we used to go to the bush for picnics, which was a great event. I never, that's something was so lovely for me to do, because we had a very life in a built-up area, with not a lot of play space, so that was such a lovely thing. And we used to, another thing we used to go was to the Minerva Theatre, Used to go to pantomimes there. That was up in Orwell Street. And then it became the Metro Theatre. They used to have MGM movies.
Can you remember any of the pantomimes that you saw?
Peter Pan.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the earliest one I remember. And they'd have them, well, every Christmas they'd have them. Jack and the Beanstalk and marvellous things like that. You know, it was fabulous. It was a beautiful 1930s Art Deco theatre. That was a live theatre first, and then it was changed into the movies.
Mm.
After the movies, we'd go over the road in Orwell Street to the Mexican Inn. It's now a real estate agent. It was lovely. Yeah. Another great place we used to go sometimes up was to King's Cross. My mother would take us to Carl's Restaurant. It was in Darlinghurst Road now, where they've got a place for a AFL football club. It's just up from the fountain, going towards King's Cross on the left-hand side. Oh, actually, there's a Neptune restaurant, a fish restaurant. Well, that used to be Carl's Restaurant, and you'd go in there and you'd smell the coffee, and they had pikelets and waffles and ice cream and Carl's caramel sauce, and it was a beautiful place. It was all very 1930s decorated with glass paned all around the restaurant, little mullion square windows and red banquet seats, you know, and beautiful blonde wood tables. It was just magic. They sold chocolates where you paid the lady as you came out. They sold little boxes of chocolates and Carl's caramel sauce. Fantastic.
So would you go out as a family quite a bit?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What would you typically do in the evening? So, what was that like?
Quite nice. We used to listen to the serials, the children's serials on the radio about 6 o'clock.
What would they be?
Oh, there was the Argonauts, on the ABC. That was a sort of an every night show, wasn't a serial really, with singing and things. And then I always remember listening to Biggles. And my friends and I used to act out Biggles at school. It was quite interesting section of our lives. And I forget some of the other shows, but we used to do that. And then, of course, there'd be homework, and we went to bed quite early. Have tea, help with tea, washing up. And
What was a typical meal?
Oh, we had a very sort of Anglo-Saxon diet. You know, it was. I don't think my mother branched out beyond the 7 days. You know, you'd have a thing for each day, like roast dinner always on Sunday midday, and there was Irish stew and chops, and once a week, every Friday, fried fish in breadcrumbs.
Did she make it or buy the fish? Did she buy the...
No, she would cook everything,
right.
But yeah. But, you know, of course, because of her background, she wasn't a great cook, but what she did well because she'd done it so often. It was nice.
Then would you have dessert was the main meal in the evening?
Well, yes, on Sunday, because of we went to school, but we used to go home from school for lunch. That was quite funny because I only went to school up the road, and often when I was little I'd go home for lunch. But yes, then because of going to school and things, we would have the main meal in the evening, but it would be quite early, never would be much after 6 o'clock.
And would there be dessert with most evening meals?
Most times, yes, fruit or stewed fruit, or sometimes, you know, nice things like apple pies or something.
Were your parents happy in their work? Look, when your mother, how long was she in the lingerie shop for?
Oh, it would have been only a couple of years at the most.
And did she work after that?
No, she didn't. She minded us, and And then, of course, my father was in the war in New Guinea, and no, she was not a working mother.
What impact did the war have on your father, his war experiences?
He loved it, really. He put his age down to go. He was quite... he really enjoyed his time in New Guinea. And,
really? He had
yes.
little children at home?
Yes, so he really liked... He told us all about, he used to...
Oh, tell us,
really
what did he
loved
have to... Everybody said...
Yes, he was very popular with all this, and he used to. They'd get rations, army rations, and they'd get somehow. I think they must have got things from the Red Cross and fruitcake in tins, and he used to send that home to us. He was so funny, and I think they'd get drink rations too, and he often used to get. He wasn't a great drinker. He used to give them to the other soldiers, so he was extremely popular. But he really did enjoy it was like an adventure to him. I think probably he led an entirely different sort of life in England, and he came from a fairly well-off sort of family, but his life was so different. I think he looked on it as an adventure here.
Well, what sort of position, what was he? Was in the army there?
Oh, he was just a private.
So he was fighting? He was an infantry person?
I don't think I never heard of him actually in a fight. He was always in a supportive sort of role.
And so it never had any adverse effects on him at all?
Not really, no, except for a wound he got in his, some sort of bayonet wound. I don't know if he fell on... They used to do a lot of night marches, and he might have, I think, and so that came back on him in later life.
Was it a bayonet wound?
Yeah, I think he might have fallen. I'm not sure how he did it.
The Japanese weren't responsible?
No, not directly, no. No, he wasn't in close combat.
But how many of you were at home when he decided to leave? I mean, to go?
Two. My brother and myself, yeah.
And how old was your brother?
Oh, I think he wouldn't have been one.
Well, how did your mother feel about this?
Oh, she was very annoyed.
Yeah.
Yes, and...
But it was okay when he came back?
Oh, yes, I remember he used to come home on leave. That was great. And I remember that vivid memory I've got, he used to wear these army, his uniform, of course, and it was of the dreadfully harsh wool. It was the khaki. But it must have been like cardboard, because I remember we'd go down, we must have gone on an outing down, walk through Woolloomooloo and all together or something, and we'd walk up to Potts Point up the Macaloon steps, and I was only very small and he was carrying me up, and I remember all the brass buttons and the harsh, the surge sticking in me. I was so happy he was there, but I do remember all those, that,
Yeah.
yes.
The other thing is, well, when he was working with the, it's not the RTA, whatever, the
main roads.
Well, was he happy in his employment there?
Yes, he really loved it, and he had made friends there, and the fishermen used to go in their fishing trawlers, and he worked on the Piedmont Bridge. They'd go under the bridge, and they'd always, he got to know them, and they'd always throw him up fresh fish. So we had lots of fresh fish at home. It was lovely.
Well, what about your mother's working day? What can you recall?
Oh, big lots of housework. Always Monday washing, and she had a copper in the laundry in the backyard. We had a little backyard in the back of our flat, sort of patio, which was quite charming, really. It overlooked the city, and it was very nice. And there was lots of washing, and then the ironing. I think it was a big thing, and we even had an ironing lady come in to do the ironing, which was quite funny, because they didn't have a lot of money, my parents. But the ironing lady, there's a lady that used to do the ironing come of the afternoon, and she and my mother would have lots of cups of tea while the ironing was being done. There's lots of starching going on.
Well, how did the war affect you? I mean, how did you feel about it? And
Oh, we used to have, it was quite exciting. We'd have blackouts, and the windows were all taped up.
yes. You can remember it being quite exciting.
Yes, and another exciting thing about, yes, you'd have blackouts, and we had an Aladdin lamp. There was a great excitement of lighting this beautiful Aladdin lamp every night. It was a sort of kerosene lamp. It was really quite a beautiful thing. So that'd and it was really cosy, you know. It was really nice in the flat, and all the windows all had paper taped on them in case a bomb was dropped and the glass shattered, and everyone had to have that. And when I'd go to school up to St Vincent's, we'd walk up Clay Street, and in Rockwell Crescent, where St Vincent's is, there was an air raid shelter built right in the middle. And I always remember running through that with the other girls coming home from school. It doesn't sound very exciting, but it was a big adventure to us. We were often told not to do it because sometimes some derelicts used to be in there, and it could have been a bit, you know. But,
Were you ever
we had a lot. It was hard to get different food, and my mother had coupons, and she was always complaining about not being able to get butter and running out of meat coupons and things.
Were you ever, when the Japanese really got involved and then they got into the harbour and what have you?
Yes.
Can you remember what the general feeling was at that time? Did you really think the Japanese were coming?
Well, I was really very young, but I remember the general feeling that people were scared, and naturally Potts Point was quite a lot of people moved out, and you could have bought a place there so cheaply because of that. Yes.
Was your mother happy?
Yeah, she sometimes seemed to me rather discontented, and that she didn't have enough more money, and but generally I think she was happy. She was quite busy, and
What about your father? Was he happy?
yes.
You know, when we were talking before about the meals and everything, I forgot to ask, was there, in the late 40s, I mean, well, maybe even in the war too, what was the variety of fruit and veg around? Like, you know how now you can get anything at any time of year, and exotic stuff and lychees and what have you. Well, in those days, what kind of variety would be available?
Not so much, no. We had lots of potatoes, of course, and I don't, it was just like apples, oranges, bananas, the peaches, I suppose, and cherries and the different fruits in the summer, but the lettuces were always the same, the big, what we call now the Icelandic lettuce, and no, there wasn't the variety. We never went to restaurants for dinner either. No.
What about shopping? You know how you said you could do the shopping locally, but did people do a big shop, or did they shop virtually on a daily basis or a weekly basis? How would that be done?
We were always going to the shop. First of all, a man used to come around to the back street with a barrow with fruit and flowers, and so you could always get that at the door. And I think another man used to come around with fish. And then my mother would go to the local store, which was the Italian family, which was they called a greengrocery. They had fruit and groceries, but she didn't go for a lot of stuff because she was always saying he was quite expensive. But that's what you did. You went to the corner shops, and there was another grocer further up the street, in Macleay Street, Mr. Maunder.
Were you the one who did? Would you go and do that?
Yes, we used to go and do the shopping. The children.
Was it called doing the messages?
Yes, you'd go with a list and a basket.
You don't hear that term anymore.
No, you don't.
I'm going to do the messages.
Yes,
it's gone.
And a list. You had a list. And yeah.
What was the ethnic mix of the area?
There was a large sort of Anglo-Saxon Irish element. There were the Italians. Yes, there were quite a few European and Jewish people. We had a Jewish family that was very German Jewish family that lived up in Cambrian Place. That building is still there, and my mother was very friendly with them, and we used to go and see them. They had a lovely flat. They were sort of refugees from Germany.
Pre-war ones, or?
Yes, they just got here before the war.
Mm.
They figured largely in our life. We often went to see them. So there were a lot of European Jewish people around.
Was there much discrimination or anything, or were they accepted? Can you remember anything about WOGs and refos and stuff like that?
I don't remember towards Jewish people, but I do remember it towards Italians and Greeks. And I even remember my own father. We'd be on the bus and these people would be all talking in their language and he'd say, "Speak English."
He would actually say it to them?
Yeah, well, in a voice loud enough to be heard, which was quite a strange thing for him to say, because he was quite a gentle man.
Were there any Asian people around?
Hardly any, really.
What about Aboriginal people? You haven't mentioned those. No?
No, never saw them.
Okay. If you were to describe the neighbourhood, I mean, how would you describe it in terms of being residential or industrial or what? How?
Residential and quite commercial, you know, in the way of small businesses.
Did many tourists sort of come up here because you had, I believe that you had shops in this area that were open later than, say, in the suburbs and what have you?
Yes.
At that point in time, in the late 40s, and I guess you would have had the also the hotels and residentials attracting, well, presumably troops on R&R and all the rest of it. I mean, was there a tourist element? Geraldine, who were your friends when you were growing up in this area?
Well, I remember I mentioned the Italian family. There was a boy and a girl that we used to play with, and they were great friends, and they led a quite different life to us. The little girl was always going to tap dancing lessons, and they used to wear sort of used to have special costumes for the different routines they did, and I used to go with her and her mother to see her in concerts, and I used to think that was they used to have them at the Masonic Hall at Double Bay, and I used to think that was a great thing. And her brother used to we taught the piano, and they had an uncle who was always used to go through the house singing Italian opera and had a beautiful voice, you know. Oh, and they used to take us to a farm at Liverpool where they had an Italian friend had his farm, and I remember that was during the war, and he had all these Italian people that were here, and I think when the Allies were at war with Italy, those people were interned, so they used to have to in some camp up near Liverpool, and they used to come and work on his farm, and we'd be up there having one of these Italian lunches out in the open, which was probably quite marvellous. We'd have wine and salami unknown to us in Potts Point from an Irish Catholic family, and then there'd be all these farm workers around. That was very interesting, and this Italian friend of theirs would walk around the table singing beautiful arias from different operas. Fantastic.
Oh gosh!
Yeah.
Before we did mention discrimination, was there much?
I think there were. I think I used to hear people saying things about WOGs and things, mainly to these, not so much the Jewish people, but to the Mediterranean Greeks and Italians. Yes, but there were a lot of Italian girls at school.
And were they accepted and treated the same?
Yes, of course they were at school with the nuns, and you know. yes.
Well, what sort of things did you do together with your friends?
Go to the pictures on Saturday afternoons. We'd go up to King's Cross. There was a beautiful picture theatre up there where the railway station is now.
Would you go regularly, like every week?
Almost, yes, nearly every Saturday we'd go. And some Saturdays my brother and I used to get the bus to Rose Bay to the Winter Garden, and my mother would give us 1 and a penny. That was like 11 cents now. It cost 11 pence to get into the movies and a penny each way on the bus.
And what were the favourite movies of that time?
Oh, there was a lot of MGM musical things with swimming movies with Esther Williams and then there were other musicals with, I forget the name of the actress, but they were very popular, and girls, friends of mine, good friends of mine, would have what they'd called theatre parties for their birthdays, and their mothers would take us all to the movies, to the Metro at King's Cross, and then we'd go off somewhere and have ice creams and things. Or to the St James Theatre in Elizabeth Street in the city, which was opposite Hyde Park. It was very nice.
Was that cinema?
Yes, it was a beautiful cinema opposite the courts in Elizabeth Street.
Yeah. When you're with your friends, I mean, how far were you allowed to roam? You've mentioned that you had a protected upbringing. I mean, how free were you?
We used to go down to... we were allowed to go down to Elizabeth Bay. You'd go a little bit up Macleay Street, and there were the steps going down to it's Billiard Avenue, and we'd go down there, and you could go down to the park at Elizabeth Bay and play, or we'd fish on the wharf, go fishing, and we used to run. Elizabeth Bay House was then let out as a sort of residential. It's a very shabby looking place, and in front of that they didn't have the nice park they have now. It was all sort of a bit overgrown, but we used to play there. So we were allowed to go down there on our own.
Yeah. Did you have any adventures?
You wouldn't let children. I remember my brother was once accosted by a man who spoke to him, and and then my mother said, never speak. They were called strangers. And I remember myself that I was about 10, and I'd go up to the top of St Neots Avenue, and you'd get the bus into town, and I had to meet these friends. I might have been about 12 or 13, and I went on my own, and I had to meet my friends at the St James Theatre to go to the afternoon movies, and I was late, and a man came down in a car and stopped and said, "There's no sign of a bus, can I give you a lift?" And I actually got into the car, and he drove me to the theatre, and then I didn't think anything about it, and I got out and I was quite safe. And I went to my mother said to me when I got home, "Were you late?" I said, no, because a man gave me a lift, and there was all hell to pay,
Yes.
Yes. And I think that they told the nuns at school, and the nuns stood up in the class on the Monday after and said, "There was a girl in this class accepted a lift from a man in a car." Squirming away in my seat.
Well,
but children were allowed to go out much more on their own.
Yeah, he said you were fishing in the harbour. I mean, was the harbour clean? Would you eat fish you caught in the harbour?
Probably. I think we only caught little, what they called tiddlers. They were about this big, I don't think we actually ate them.
Oh, right.
It was more of a hobby, really.
And so how far could you roam around the place? I mean, it sounds like you had...
I think that's as far as we went on our own, which that was quite a long way for small children,
At what age could you go down there?
We were about 10, but I remember I wasn't much more than 10, and I remember taking my younger sister in the pram down to Mass one Sunday, on Sundays sometimes, to St Canis's. On my own, probably was to give my mother a bit of a break or something.
Yeah. Were there places you were not allowed to go?
Oh, no, I can't recall them, but we just didn't go there,
Mm. And that you can't remember any specific places you were forbidden?
No.
What about people that you were forbidden? I mean, you mentioned Rosalie Norton. Was there anybody else that you were just told to keep away from?
No, not specifically.
No. How did the teachers at school treat you?
Oh, very kindly. They were quite strict, the nuns, but they were, now they seemed strict at the time, but when you look back, they were quite loving people, really. And there were a lot of nuns then there. Now I don't think there's any.
Mm. Mm. Well, where did most local kids go to school?
A lot went to, some went, most of the ones I knew went to St Vincent's, little boys, and went in the smaller classes, little boyfriends we had. Some children, I think they went to the Darlinghurst Public School, and my mother was always threatening to send us to Plunkett Street School at Woolloomooloo if we didn't behave. Poor Plunkett Street.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, what was the reputation of Woolloomooloo at that time? How would you describe?
It seemed to be a little bit, not sleazy, but down, they were very old and very charming, really, cottages, and they were inhabited a lot by fishing families, Maltese, Italian people.
Mm. From what you can recall of the area, did any of the areas have different, that were looked down upon, or had different types of reputations?
Surrey Hills was looked down upon, and Paddington was very rough. Yeah, I remember that we had, quite a lot of girls I went to school with came from quite diverse backgrounds. They were quite wealthy families that came from as far as Vaucluse to go to St Vincent's, and I've still got good friends that I had who lived there, and I remember that there was one of the girls who lived at Vaucluse who's still a friend of mine, and she had a party, and her father, I think she had the party at her house out there, and then her father drove us all to our respective homes, and there was one very Australian sort of girl, he dropped people at Rose Bay and things like that, and this girl said, "Oh, well, now down to my place at the slums at Paddington." That was so funny, because now Paddington is so trendy and sought after.
Mm. And were kids at your school who came from sort of like the slums and everything, were they treated any differently to other kids?
No.
I want to ask you about sex education. I mean, either at school or at home. I mean, did you get any?
No.
So what happened when you started to menstruate? What did you think was going on?
Oh, I was quite frightened by that, and I went and told my mother, and she just told me that you wear a modest or whatever it is, and but it was never explained to me.
So she didn't say to you, "Well, this is what this is about"?
No.
So how did you find out about sex?
When I went to university and had an affair with my husband, who we're still together. Yes.
Oh, God. What did you know about abortion?
Nothing.
What was the size of the average family?
2 children was a very small family, 4 children was, some was 6.
Gosh, was there any kind of employment available for kids? I mean, you might.
Yes, lots of.
What?
Yes. Oh, as you say, doing the messages. My brother had a job with the chemist up at Chalice Avenue. The chemist is still there, but he used to, people get prescriptions delivered to their flat, so each evening he'd go and drop in the prescriptions for the chemist, And there was lots of jobs. He also worked in Woolworths at King's Cross on Saturday mornings.
At what age?
Oh, he was at school. He'd be in his teens.
Oh, right. But 15 or more?
Yes.
Oh, right.
But when he did the chemist job, he was younger than that.
What were the most popular newspapers of the time? Or in your
The
house?
Sun, and in the evening, and there was the Truth, but that was very risque, you know.
Did you get the Truth in your family?
Oh, occasionally they'd get it, but they'd get it quite a lot.
Were you allowed to read it?
Yeah.
What about magazines? Can you remember,
Oh, there was the Woman's Weekly.
What about other ones like Home Beautiful or stuff like that?
Yes, they had some of them. They didn't have many of them because they started to get a bit expensive, and my mother didn't have, that much money for those sort of things.
Can you remember any jokes or tricks that were popular at that time that kids would do?
Jokes? Well, it wasn't really a joke, but I remember that my brother and I and some of our little friends, it was a bit silly really, but we used to have great fun running into the different flats and ringing people's doorbells and then running away. It was very...
Yeah, I think everyone did that.
Yeah.
What songs can you remember that were really popular from the time?
Lily Marlene and all those. I just can't recall them now. A lot of the 50s songs I remember because I was I was a bit older. Buttons and bows and things like that, But I enjoyed the songs. I just can't recall any at the moment.
Okay. I've got a weird question. Sorry, that's not right. It's not a weird question, but sometimes people don't know how to respond. What can you remember about rituals? And by rituals, I mean things like Empire Day or Arbor Day or Wattle Day. Can you remember occasions when you would always do something that was
we always went down to the Anzac March on the dot, 9 o'clock we were always there. My father used to march, but so that was one thing we always did.
Your father marched?
Yes.
Can you remember any celebration of Wattle Day or Arbor Day? Or Empire Day?
Not those particular days.
Firecracker night?
Eh?
Firecracker night?
Yes.
How would you celebrate Cracker Night? Or what?
We'd all go to all the kids and their fathers and mothers. They'd save up for the crackers, and then buy the crackers, and we'd go up to the nearest open area. I remember it was at the top of St Neots Avenue. There's a park there now, but it was all a bit of a wild, not wild, but uncultivated area, just sort of grass growing, and we'd let off crackers there, and it was always cold. I think it was winter time. It was good fun though.
Can you remember anything like things like saluting the flag or saying the anthem or something called the pledge?
Standing up in the movies for the Queen.
Oh yeah.
And and although my mother was very anti-British, she would always support, things like that. It was very funny because I remember that when the Queen and Prince Philip, when they were first married, came here in the 50s, we went down to the Domain with another friend from school. My mother packed us up. We must have got at 4 o'clock in the morning and all trooped down there waiting for the Queen to come. Yes. And we'd always go and see the Queen if she came, or the Mountbattens came, and we'd always, it's quite a mixture.
Can you remember ever doing anything like maypole dancing or any sort of mass displays?
No, not maypole dancing, but of course at school we'd have lots of religious festivals, and I was used to be a flower girl and walk in procession with a statue of the Virgin it was held high, and the little flower girls would walk in front in white dresses dropping petals out of baskets.
Yes.
It was so exciting. We loved doing that. Yeah.
What about something called physical culture?
Yes, we had that. They used to come to school and...
Who's they?
well, they were the Graham and Borough School of Physical Culture. There were these ladies in... that was a special school, these women, and they were, I suppose they were physical education teachers, and so they'd come to our school about... I think we even had Miss Burrows, who must have been the instigator of it, big woman, enormous big woman, and they'd wear uniform that was sort of yellow and brown, and a hat. And they would come and we'd all go, I think it was once a week. I mean, this was our physical education. We'd sort of do exercises in the hall, and we had a big hall in our school, and that was it,
It was pretty sedate sort of thing, though, wasn't it?
Yes. It wasn't... they'd have basketball and things, but I was never sporty,
And what about mass displays and...
Oh, yes, we'd have lots of that on St Patrick's Day. We'd go to the showground, and they'd have marching. All the different schools would have a school group that would march with the school banner in front, and there'd be displays in the middle of the arena, and St Patrick's Day was a very big day. And we'd go to, our life was very much a sort of religious based, so these things we were relating to the church. I think on one particular day of the year we'd go to St Patrick's Seminary at Manly, and there was I think it was to Our Lady, a procession. Good Friday we'd go up to Campbelltown on the train, the steam train from Central Railway, and there'd be stations of the cross all through the countryside at Campbelltown, which is probably all built on now. The Franciscans had a monastery up there. That was a great day. It was sort of a combination of religious and friends getting together and having picnics and things. Very nice.
What were you aware of any... What part of the... how aware were you of the world outside your local area?
On a very small basis, outside my local area was Watson's Bay, Manly, to go to somewhere like Liverpool seemed out in the bush, back of beyond.
How aware
we had quite a big, outside my world there was letters home to England and from the family and the Irish. Yes.
So you were aware of overseas,
yes.
But that was England, Ireland. What were the most important places, or what were important places to you in the area?
The school and King's Cross, the shopping, and friends' houses.
What can you remember? Did King's Cross change, say in the 40s and the 50s? I mean, around that up to early 50s. Was that a period of change for the cross?
Yes, it was. It was really all through the 50s. It was really nice, and you could always go up there and have a walk in the evening and a coffee. Which you can still do now. I feel perfectly safe there, but it wasn't sleazy. And then in the 60s, I think, with the late 60s, with the Vietnam War, when the American servicemen came here on R&R leave, it changed from then.
Oh, wow.
Because they set up the Bourbon and Beefsteak Bar, and they knocked down places to build hotels, and that's when it changed.
What smells do you associate with the area?
Fish shops, the cake shops with the cakes cooking, and cows with the coffee and the parklets. the florists.
What sounds?
The trolley bus made it. They had a trolley bus going up and down Clay Street and went down William Street, and the trams. Not much traffic, not much private, vehicles, in the way of private vehicles.
Can you remember the first Holden car in the 48?
Kids playing and people calling out and the barrowman calling out.
Can you remember the Holden car?
Yes.
What impact did the car have, the advent of the car and it becoming a common thing, have on you?
Friends had cars, friends' fathers had cars, and, it was quite a good thing to have a car, yes.
Did it change in terms of pollution or safety or anything like that, or?
No, it just became busier, I think.
Did you have open fires in your place?
No, it wasn't big enough, our house. We had radiators.
Was it more polluted then or now?
Now.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything I haven't asked that I should have? Do you feel like we've covered it, or is there
I
anything
think so, yes, Sue.
you wanted to say?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thanks very much.
All right. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. God, what time is it?